All right, guys, welcome back to another one. We're going to be discussing aggro teams. We're going to be discussing tips into how to deal with the best aggro teams that you ever played against simply by looking at some of their strategies and maybe even finding ways to counter them. Okay, just as a big reminder, we're almost there. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. We're going to be giving a C9 jersey raffle, okay? And we're going to be giving a C9 jersey after 1,000 subscribers. If you want to have an entry, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. You should know it at this point in time. But again, make sure you do it to every single video, and that will give you an entry per video. Okay, so let's get started into the content. We're going to be covering a little bit of understanding the enemy in terms of what it is that they do and what's different between just a simple team that likes to swing. And then we're going to be covering the 4 tips, as well as kind of showing what you can do when you're playing by yourself. First few things that we need to kind of discuss. Is the team aggressive or are they just stupid? This is kind of important for you to ask because when you're playing against teams that are very stupid, they're uncoordinated. They tend to leave their most important player at the beginning of the team or at the very end. Depending on who's leading, you can kind of figure out what is exactly going on. And usually you can counter it as simply as just having a first blood. Maybe you can counter it with an op. You can counter it with a simple flash, maybe throwing a smoke at the beginning. It's really easy to kind of misinterpret aggressive teams as something like really spectacular. They could just be plain dumb. They could just be uncoordinated. The main thing that you need to look at is their comp. So for example, if you're looking at a comp like the one that we just showed, this is over here on Sunset. If you're looking at a comp like this, it's really easy to interpret them as aggressive. You can see that they're using their flashes, they're coordinating, they're throwing all of their utility at once, they're all playing together. This is one example of a team that's playing very cohesively. And this is that's something that you can look at when you're trying to identify whether they're aggressive or not. Now let's look into the second example. We can see that there's a player that's kind of watching the cross, and then just another 2 that are kind of playing together. They could be a duo, they could just be by themselves, it could be a jet asking for something like a dash, but you're gonna for a flash as they're dashing in. But you're gonna notice that there is kind of like other things missing. There's maybe, for example, smokes might be on the way, and they could be playing all of this, but at the same time, there's a lot of gaps in the way that they're entering. There's a lot of gaps in who is going in and when it's happening. This is where you can start looking at that lack of coordination. And this is what can differentiate between an aggressive team and a team that's just being, I will swing first. If I get the kill, that means we're better, right? That's a huge difference. There's a huge distinction between the two. If they're just winning fights, then that means that they're just looking at what's happening and they're just kind of repeating it. But a true aggressive team requires the coordination of everybody's utility at the same time while trying to make sure that they cover all your lanes. For example, this guy's coming in while somebody else is ready to follow right up. And then we have somebody playing post plant while the other person's setting up the push. You can see this is a little bit more coordinated than someone that's just throwing a flash while somebody overextends. That difference needs to be made whenever you're kind of playing your rounds. It could be something as quickly as round 1 that you can identify this to something as round 5. But you need to identify that playstyle in order to be able to counter them in the future. Okay, look at other things as well. Are they swinging everything or are they actually timing their swings? Are they coordinating utility or are you just seeing some utility that's in tandem with one another, right? What are they doing, right? This is where you need to start asking those questions. Now let's look into the actual tips. If the team that you're playing against is actually coordinated, the first tip I got for you guys is to set up traps or kill boxes, as I like to call them. Kill boxes are a really important tool that you can use on both the defender and the attacker side of things when you're looking at different chokes. So this is one example of a kill box. So you can see at the beginning, we can set up 2 agents that are going to be playing for the kill box on this choke. Now you can flip this exact same script and have them playing towards this CT area. You can have a trip, or maybe you can have an omen that's ready to swing while someone's preparing for the other player to maybe kind of swing off of that flash. This is an example of someone that's setting up a kill box. Okay. One thing that you need to keep in mind though is that some agents are able to create those kill boxes and some can only work off of them. So for example, a jet can't really create a kill box, but they can act off of it, right? Something like, for example, a jet can play in the position where the cipher is, whereas the omen can be the one that sets it up. If you don't have anyone with some sort of CC or concussive utility or anything that might give your team an advantage in a swing, then you're not going to get a chance to play for those particular kill boxes. So I've seen scenarios where players don't really have the utility. They go for a Sova instead of a breach on a map like Sunset. They have nothing that they can use to set up those kill boxes. If you cannot get an advantage in those 50-50s and you cannot give this guy a cross that's going to give him an easy fight, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to set up those boxes. So look for things like Cypher, Breach, Omen. These are some easy starter agents that a lot of people tend to already have at this point in time, and they can be really good at creating them. Simply because they are really good at stalling multiple opponents and not just one. So keep that in mind when you're looking for those particular kill boxes. Secondly, whenever you're setting up that kill box, make sure you're playing off of somebody and set up that cross. Make sure the cross is not within the same angle. You're not double swinging in one area. You're playing in opposite directions. Make sure that you're playing away from the opponent and you're playing away from your teammate, because you're making sure that they have a free fight. As you can see, if the flash goes off, this guy should get a free kill. And that's exactly what you want to make sure you're setting up. Last but not least, look for that trigger. The trigger could be something as simple as the flash. It could be the dash in. It could be that they're waiting for the smoke to drop. Look for that trigger before you're using that utility, because I find that a lot of players tend to use it a little early. So find the trigger before you do that execute for the kill box, because you might give away your lead a little early. Let's look at tip number 2. Play an objective. If you're playing against an aggressive team, I find that players tend to believe that they just need to swing back. They just need to get that first fight. They need to get that first blood. Most of the time in the elos that I'm seeing, a lot of people are just struggling on the understanding that playing objective is your biggest chance of winning a round. Okay. The bread and butter of this game is retakes. So if you can set up a good retake or you can prevent a good retake, you're already giving yourself a bigger chance of winning that round. Now, not every round is winnable, and that happens. Sometimes mistakes happen. You swing, you miss. People hold a cross. They don't really get the fight on the free opponent. Happens. But it is important to kind of make sure that you're already setting yourself up for that fight in the first place. Things that might occur during the round is that you get picked off early. Again, you're looking for that fight, or you're maybe not jump peeking an area that you should be jump peeking. Maybe you go for information and you miss swing. Maybe you just get concussed and then a jet just dashes on you, right? There's a lot of things that could happen that you might get picked off early. If you realize that you're playing against an aggressive team on defense, try to play off site, or try to let your team know that you're playing off site, or try to not get, as I mentioned here, get pressured into fights. If you find that the aggressive team really wants to get that fight on you, both on attack and on defense, don't give them that. Play a little bit more passive, wait 20 seconds on attack and see if they're going to be doing something against you. This is a good way for you to kind of prepare for those fights. Overextending, pretty straightforward. Just don't do that. I find that players tend to believe that they can get a really easy flank, and they might either get caught off guard by a lurking Cypher, or they're too late for the retake. Last but not least, utility. I don't really know what it is with players that have non-refundable utility, but they just seem to throw it away really quickly. I've seen geckos that just throw their molly because they think that's going to help them delay for time or something like that, where you can use it elsewhere. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So you can fix a lot of this stuff. You can fix a lot of these things when playing objective by making sure everybody's alive. You can do safe rotations. For example, I can see this gecko kind of rotating through spawn instead of going towards mid. Instead, you can go here and maybe clear with this corner that you have right there, instead of getting picked off on the rotation, getting caught by somebody playing in tiles. Other things that you can do is expect some of the plays that they've done in the past. Okay, they're going to concuss towards backside, or they have ult. Let's play offside, right? These are really easy ways to kind of predict the most aggressive plays that they might have in their book, and prepare to just like swing together or call an important part of the play. Things like that is like, oh, okay, once the smoke drops, we can kind of go in, or they're going to be crossing through here. They're playing really aggressive and overextending. Let's hold a cross here, right? One and dones are your best friend a lot of the time when you're playing crosses, as they're going to catch opponents off guard. But again, more on that later. So we talked about utility. When we're looking at utility, there's different things that you should do. So I myself have never been a utility god when it comes to lineups, but I myself, I'm starting to pick them up a little bit more. They seem to become a lot more important now. And the reason for it being that it seems as though players are starting to get more comfortable with the idea of swinging with teams. As time goes on, the game, the base knowledge of the game increases. So you can't just rely on mechanics alone sometimes, okay? And if you're someone that can't fully rely on mechanics, you have to have something to fall back on. Lineups is a really important tool that you can use to kind of expand your post-plant ability, okay? Other things that you can do is look for those lethal abilities to lock down lanes. So for example, you can easily lock down Heaven, for example, right here with mollies. You can prevent the spike diffuse on attack by just putting some mollies on the site. You can prevent something by just throwing a molly. Let's say your gecko, again, you're playing here, you can throw your molly on maybe the spike diffusal or maybe the spike plant. Use these things, plan ahead of time. Okay. Last but not least, I see that a lot of people don't tend to wait whenever there's like a flank or there's like a regroup or they have utility that they can use. Oh, okay, I'm gonna throw like a dart over to your end. You can use it for that flank. Or I have this piece of utility right here. Let's make a lot of noise on CT while the person flanks, right? Combine a bunch of different plays at once. If you're going to crunch an opponent that likes to play aggressive, you want to make sure that you're using these pieces of your kit to kind of counter them. So this one's pretty easy. Assess your utility. Make sure you're planning ahead of time. Try to see what you can do with that utility. If it's non-refundable, try to save it for that post plant, as it might give you a larger, an even bigger chance of just winning. Okay. So what happens when that team that you were playing with, let's say that you tried tips 1 through 3, it did not work. You are left on your own. Your gecko doesn't listen. Your clove doesn't know how to properly smoke. All of this happens. It happens way too often. And in fact, a lot of players just think, if I give my team more picks, then it's going to be better. And to some degree, you're right. I'm not going to argue that more picks does not equal to a higher likelihood of winning. But there's the way of which you will get those picks. Now, I already talked about lurking. Lurking in the past has always been a really successful method of getting those picks early and safe. But at the same time, it's not the best way of kind of maintaining that lead. A lot of the times you have to maintain that lead in a fight, or you have to maintain that lead while you're protecting a site or while you're getting pushed on, okay? Whether it's a retake or not. And the best way to kind of look at is that you cannot just swing back, because I find that players that think that they need to catch the opponent by swinging them or timing them or going in through the smoke because they're going to catch them off guard leads into them swinging into 2, potentially 3 people, or getting into a less favorable position because they're now able to be flashed by the opponent. Do not put yourself in that position, okay? Aggressive teams want picks. They want you to take that fight. That's exactly what they want you to think. Usually they make you run out of options, that they make you believe that swinging is the right option, okay? Off angles are your best friend. I've seen it way too often that Jets will just hold the easiest off angle of their lives, but because it's not really cleared, or because everybody else is just running, there's too much going on, too much information as they're pushing in, the Jets able to get 1, potentially even 2, okay? So unless you have a read, or you know their position and you have to swing, or you understand that the only position is for you to swing because you're getting mollied off, right? Unless that stuff is happening, which are the exceptions, I will not ask you to swing in a position where you're getting raided by 3 or 4 different players, okay? These players are aggressive because they're confident. Good crosshair placement will actually save you more often than not. And this is where we kind of have to discuss different things. Now, there's a lot of crosshair placement guides out there. Again, if someone wants me to make one, I can. I can make one per map. I can make one in general. I've talked about it in the past a little bit differently than most other people do, but I can kind of make it a little bit more generalized for every map. But make sure you're looking into off angles, and make sure that you're looking into crosshair placements. Most of the time, an opponent is going to be swinging wide. They start from here, they're going to be swinging wide for you. Swing and hold your crosshair wider from the angle. Most of the time, the rule of thumb is it's a lot easier to swing into the opponent rather than following it. So make sure that you're holding the angle a little bit wider. It might give you a higher likelihood of catching 1 and potentially 2 opponents off guard if you have a good crosshair. Swinging is not going to give you the advantage, but holding will give you a bigger advantage in terms of dealing with multiple opponents. Again, peeker's advantage is a thing, and that's why you want to make sure you're holding that wider crosshair, as by the time that you realize that they stopped, you might still have that chance to be able to rotate or be able to go back into cover or still flick on the opponent, okay? So these are the tips. These are 4 different tips that I believe that everybody should incorporate right now as ranked is happening and most people are starting to get placed into their actual ranks. So this is something you should start looking at. Aggressive teams are going to be happening a lot. People don't care about the rank because they're losing like -10 per loss. So they're just trying different things. Don't get caught off guard. Don't just swing because you believe that that's the only way to do it. There's smarter ways to go about it. Pay attention to your post plant. Make sure you're assessing your utility and playing for that utility, and you should be good. So that out of the way, let's conclude this and start our question period.